establish a fundamental voice, a voice, not the voice, representing what's called social inclusion and people who are in the marginalised in our rural societies. It's 30 years in operation, and it's sort of reinvented itself each time. But the main thing is, it is that voice, and it tries to implement programmes. For example, it is part of the NRN network, which is also a partnership with NUIG Galway, or University College Galway, the Wheel and Philip Farley, and itself is a very successful partnership. It runs the Wetlands Forum, and in this day and age, the Wetlands Forum came about because there was a need to look at how do you bring the subject of biodiversity, how do you bring the subject of environment into the rural dialogue. And any of you who knows this is quite a difficult thing to do, because there is, all across Europe I can say, there is a fear in rural communities that the green agenda, that the environmental agenda somehow threatens rural areas, because it somehow is seen as an agenda that will either drive farmers out of business or drive people out of rural areas. And in that sense, we have to somehow bring that agenda to rural communities. So our Wetlands Forum has brought together a network of local community groups who are involved in local wetland areas, mainly boglands, peatlands, but also just plain wetlands that were seen as a major obstacle in the development of farming practice, but actually cannot be changed. And in fact, in Ireland, we had a great campaign to drain the Shannon area, the Callows area. Many people now realise, thank God we didn't do that, because if we did, we would have wiped out acres and hectares of very good land in terms of biodiversity. So the Wetlands Forum, which I'm dwelling on a little bit, is about bringing environmentalists, people who live in the area, together. And Tom Jones talked about, it's very easy to have a partnership with like-minded people. But as you can see, that's not necessarily the case here. And I think its strength is that we are engaging with farmers, with environmental thinking people, and with just plain dwellers in rural areas to say, how do we embrace the reality of climate change, while at the same time keeping people in the area, keeping the livelihoods of people in the area, and trying to make them sustainable. So on our website you will read a lot about the Wetlands Forum. The other partnership that we work with is the Meals and Weeds. It's really a care partnership. And again, it's a network of groupings within rural areas, sometimes spontaneously established, to bring certain services, whether it's meals to people recovering from hospital visits, or simply people who are living alone, live so far away and cannot drive and need either a meal a day delivered to the house, or indeed other services, whether it's just to have cleaning done or basic services that people need on a daily basis. That's a fledgling network, but that network is also a realization that in rural areas we have a growing older population. We will not have the nursing homes to house them, and in many cases we don't want the nursing homes to be the ultimate solution. Most people, when they're asked, they want to live as long as possible in their own areas and in their own places and in their own houses. And therefore, as we learned from COVID, being at home, as cooped up as we were during that period, is a lot better than being cooped up in a home, which is not as personal as your own home. So that network is a really important network, and it is a partnership. It is a partnership between the health authorities, local communities and other agencies. The other partnership we have run, we've talked about, is the National Rural Network, which in itself is a partnership which includes the Department and Department of Rural Development and Agriculture, and of course the various other elements in all of that space. And that's an interesting one. Over the last 7 years, I can say we've learned a great deal. And we have learned that you can bring programs in the form of case histories, through research, to the public eye, but also to people themselves in rural areas who may be not as fully supportive of these things when they hear about them first. And when you look at again, especially the Green Agenda work, and this was very much highlighted by the University of Galway section of our partnership, you see in the case histories how local farmers, communities actually are embracing the Green Agenda, are embracing the various initiatives that they must embrace into the future. And sometimes when you hear public figures say, oh, rural is not really in that space, I would ask you to go on the NRN website and look at those case histories. And I think you will see a massive desire in rural areas to do that. And that springs from the fact that in Ireland, we did, in rural Ireland especially, we had a thing called the water schemes. Now, if you're not in Ireland, you may not know a lot about that. But in the 60s, when I was a younger person, a lot of households did not have water. They did not have basic water within the house. Some had private wells, and some just had the well outside the door. And I was certainly one of those. And I remember at 14 years of age being dragged to a meeting where the local organisers had decided we have to change that. That was a partnership, because that meant linking with the local authority, linking with farm owners, because some of their land was needed to bring the pipes through, and linking with a whole range of other actors in the system. And rural communities right across Ireland in that period, in the 1960s, and in some cases into the 70s, delivered water, which was a basic service in the latter part of the 20th century, to rural communities. Could not have been done without partnership. So when we look at the old Irish tradition, it's called mehel, which is effectively the spontaneous delivery of local help to local farmers, to local people in trouble. Mehel was effectively neighbours coming together to do that. That in itself was the partnership. So right up along the scale to the very effective leader partnerships that we now have, that Marion talked about. Those sought and do seek to replicate the bottom-up approach. They must do so, because if they don't, they will not have buy-in. And if you're going to change something in the local area, no matter how important you think it is, and no matter how important you think it's needed, you still need to bring together those in the local area. If you don't, you lose out. In recent times, I was very much involved in the Peat Lines Directive. And I can tell you, there's a lot of fun and a lot of funny stories to be told about bringing a group of people where I live into the era that we must not put turf. Now that in Ireland, to state that is really important. And I leave you with the story when we were mandated, me and my colleagues in the local area, to negotiate the best possible settlement. So we sat with all the various actors. Again, it's a partnership, local government, national government, and our job was to somehow do the best possible deal for people who are asked to give up putting turf. And when we negotiated the settlement, which effectively relocated some to other bogs, less designated, and brought compensation to others, there was a certain satisfaction and there was a certain belief that we had achieved something momentous. The European directive was delivered, and farmers and local areas can embrace the beginning of the change. So there's a funny story I'll finish with you very quickly, and I know time is running out. My other job as voluntary, the only really volunteering thing I do, is I'm chairman of the local, wait for it, graveyard extension committee. Now that's future rural development. Thank you very much.